People who realized they had bad therapists, what were the red flags? Story 1. In high school, about a year and a half after my anorexia diagnosis, I was finally put through to a specialist psychologist at a dedicated state eating disorder service. It was a 3-hour drive to get there, and I was really hoping this would be what helped me get my life back. It was a male therapist, and that made me anxious because all my previous therapists had been females, and I was really uncomfortable around men. I had to do a lot of paperwork and questionnaires about my history, my body, how I felt, etc. The red flags started showing when he didn't take notes in our sessions. He filmed them. I signed a form saying it was okay, but it was very unnerving. It made me so anxious, and I would spend a lot of time in the sessions just staring at the camera and dissociation. Another thing was that he didn't mention anything at all about my eating disorder, self-harm, anxiety, depression, nothing. He never asked about anything like that at all. I felt like I was making no progress whatsoever after the first couple of sessions, but I felt like I had to keep coming back because he was a specialist and it was very expensive. I think I attended maybe 5 sessions, and all I can remember was him telling me that I was a monster and evil, and the real me was trying to get out, but the evil side of me was keeping her in. He also went into great detail about how my traumatic birth and illnesses as a premature newborn, not being able to be held for ages, etc., had left me unable to feel love, and how lonely I must be. It all came to a head when, the night before my appointment, I received an email from the clinic saying that he had resigned. I felt so betrayed, and this was just after my last psychologist had gone on maternity leave and discharged me, so I was very sensitive to feeling abandoned. He knew this. There was absolutely no warning at all. 1 week it was fine, then the next, he left. It was incredibly traumatic, and I seriously declined while I was under this care. My anxiety bordered on OCD. I had rituals I had to follow, was binging and purging often, and was dissociating a lot of the time. I actually went back there a couple of years ago to request a copy of my file and the tapes. I wanted to see if it was as bad as I remembered, or if I was just overreacting or making it all up. I went there, and all they had was my questionnaires. They contacted the man, but he said he had deleted the videos. He violated the contract and the policy of the clinic. All files were supposed to be kept for 7 years after turning 18, or at request, they would be destroyed. They gave me the paperwork I needed to lodge a formal complaint against this man. I did a search for him, and he's still practicing. I hope his other clients didn't have to suffer like I did, and I don't know how he sleeps at night. Story 2. I was in high school. During the process of getting to know each other, details came out, and when he realized that I drank and smoked but didn't have any intimate relationships with anyone, he goes, so it's okay to drink and smoke weed but not have relations? That's some backwards logic. He said it like he was personally offended. For starters, buddy, I'm here for you to help me move past my mother's passing and my dad remarrying. I'm not here for you to tear apart my morals and tell me why your opinion is better. And second, it's my freaking body. If I decide to drink and smoke but not to stick my dong in crazy freaking high school girls, that's my prerogative. Smoking a J never got anyone pregnant or gave them an STD. I don't think that stuff is wrong. I was just wholly uninterested when I was in high school, for Pete's sake. We had been talking about an ex who broke up with me because I wouldn't sleep with her, and he proclaimed that I should have just effed her so she'd stay around. Like, I'm sorry, what? I'm supposed to give up my virginity and morals to keep some high school hussy around? And then I realized this dude just encouraged a 16-year-old boy to sleep with his girlfriend so she wouldn't leave him. And that's when I realized this dude was not for me. My goal was not to have my morals torn apart and questioned. My goal was to move past the passing of my mother and find happiness. Story 3. I'm beginning to think maybe my therapist wasn't all that great. Every week she'd ask me how things had been that week, and she'd pick out something from what I said, and we'd talk over that in detail. But she never seemed to recall an awful lot about the things we'd discussed before, and we never actually moved forward to doing any kind of work or anything. I just turned up, talked for an hour, and then left. I ran out of coverage for the sessions after 6 months, and she agreed with me at that point that I hadn't really made any progress at all, and that I hadn't succeeded in changing anything really. Her only advice was, Have you tried just not thinking these thoughts? She recommended a particular YouTube video about mindfulness as I was leaving for the last time, but also told me I need to spend less time thinking about things and over-focusing. I don't really know what I'm supposed to take away from that. I think this is what a lot of people view as another hurdle in taking the leap to finally seek help for themselves, and it's already a massive achievement in taking the first step to improving your mental health by just deciding to get professional help in the first place. But if the stigma and self-doubting wasn't already enough, now there's an added layer of questioning whether your time and money will actually be well spent, especially when all that really occurred in this OP's sessions could now easily be accomplished by artificial intelligence. Just spitting back out input that you feed the therapist with no narrative built around your issues or progression towards coping or resolving them. At least with AI, it can build out a database of things you mentioned to recall information from past sessions. I hope this incident didn't deter the OP from continuing the healing process elsewhere. Story 4. I was abused as a child by my mother's stepbrother. I was always under the assumption that she knew about it because I was in therapy from age 4 until I started high school. I lived with my dad because of it. Our insurance changed, so I had to change to a new therapist. So abuse, PTSD, parental alienation from my mother, depression, and self-harm to start. The new therapist flat out told me she didn't believe what had happened during our first session together. I went to the waiting area and grabbed my dad, who also reiterated why I was there. She told him he was doing me no favors by indulging my delusion. We had a current restraining order against this guy as well. She really soured any future attempts for me to open up to professionals because I was afraid they wouldn't believe me. Thankfully, I'm in a much better place now and have been for a good while. Story 5. This thread is so tough to read. Bad therapists can ruin lives. You are in such a hard place that you push through your fears and reach out for help, a step that can take years because it's so scary. Being met in that tremendously difficult moment and state of vulnerability by an unprofessional pea-brain is devastating and can make you want to give up. I had several lousy people pretending to help me before I found the right therapist, thanks to a friend who also works in the field. There are plenty of red flags here to look out for, so here are some green flags to keep in mind. They are passionate and attend courses and seminars regularly. They are part of an association and are recommended. They never blame you, lose their patience with you, or tell you that you can leave if you don't like it. They have had therapy themselves. This is very, very, very important. Story 6. Psychiatrist, actually. I was talking about the impact of my dad's alcoholism, and he tried to justify it. He's a grown man. He can do what he wants. I got angry, but decided to shrug it off. Then I talked about the financial burden that my mom was stuck with as a result of my dad's drinking and reckless spending. Again, he defended it. He can use his money however he likes. I snapped at that point. I told him that my father had a responsibility to put a roof over our heads and food on the table. I also said that my mother shouldn't have to rack up thousands of dollars of debt while he's getting wasted and totaling our car. He started shouting at me about how little I know, how my role as a woman is to not speak out against men, etc. I got fed up, so I called him a quack and walked out. Story 7. She was angry and impatient, kept pushing me for information I obviously wasn't comfortable with opening up to. Then she dismissed me, saying I was just sad or lazy and garbage, and not really depressed. Then she made a joke about how bad it could be, since I'm a guy. It's not like I was art or anything. I remember shutting down at that point and just saying what she wanted to hear and then left. Made me super seppuku for weeks after, as I was molested as a kid and was in an abusive relationship at the time where I was being R'd daily. Every time I go by that cursed building, I want to pull in and find some way to get her fired. But I doubt I could even remember her face anymore. It was several years ago. Been on the waiting list for a therapist since at the only other place in the city. I was under the impression that a therapist's main objective was to be a person who validates how you're feeling and then helps you address them in a healthy way. Seems like the last thing you'd want to do is downplay what your patient is experiencing and force them to internalize it even more. They should feel open about sharing their innermost thoughts and emotions. But if they're constantly told their feelings are dismissible, then they're not going to be comfortable continuing the conversation and won't make any progress. Story 8. Not me, but a friend. Therapist always had an observer in sessions. Their behavior was very blame-oriented. They blamed my friend for feeling the way they did, instead of trying to work through the issues leading them to feel that way. Therapist sided with others whom my friend was trying to work through feelings and issues with. Therapist openly told my friend they were overreacting to situations that were brought on by anxiety and that my friend should chill out. I had no idea until my friend burst into tears one day. I told them to end the sessions and complained straight away. Such horrendous, harmful behavior, and it was all witnessed by someone else. Luckily, they found a fabulous therapist after, but it was so damaging and set them back years in recovery. Story 9. He replaced my favorite therapist, who had retired to spend more time with his grandchildren. In our first session, he rolled his eyes and made a joke about jumpers taking up all his time. This was 5 minutes after we met. Needless to say, I did not feel comfortable talking about my past seppuku attempts with him or about anything more heavy than the weather. I canceled our next appointment and waited months to be seen by a different therapist in a different practice. My new therapist does not make jokes about her patients, and I'm actually kind of sad that I'll have to leave her to go to grad school. Story 10. When I was in high school, I was an obsessive perfectionist, but I also had debilitating depression and severe ADHD, which led to me receiving low marks in school, which of course only perpetuated the cycle. At maybe the second appointment with this therapist, she had me read my grades out loud to her, to which she responded, "Wow, I'm surprised that a perfectionist like you has such poor marks. I would think that would upset you." She then told my mother that I clearly didn't have ADHD. I was only doing poorly in school because I didn't care enough. Needless to say, I never saw her again. This one also broke like the number one rule of being a decent therapist: patient confidentiality. No matter how small and insignificant a detail may seem, it's still privileged information that the patient has chosen to share with their therapist, and that should be respected and kept between the two of them. You can't create a safe space if it feels like anything you could say would be revealed to outsiders or used against you. Really just unprofessional. Story 11. My first therapist was pretty bad. In our first session, she compared me to a dog because I like small spaces. She also said that my relationship at the time wasn't real, we were both girls, and that bisexual people don't exist. She also spent most of every session talking about other patients and things she'd done herself to improve. When I went on antidepressants, she was angry and said I could have tried something homeopathic instead. I started to dread going. It was awful, especially for someone as young as I was. Story 12. For myself, she was fairly new and completely out of her depth. I had been married to a woman with a serious personality disorder. I was in pretty bad shape after the mostly horrifying divorce. She would, or could, not stop drumming the "men are the abusers" thing to me. Even when we discussed it, she would flip back in the next conversation, like she was reading back something she had memorized and couldn't make any course corrections. Story 13. Not me, but my husband. When his dad passed away, he talked to a counselor to help deal with the loss. Around the same time, he was being abused by his stepfather and stepbrother. The counselor figured out that he was being abused, but came to the conclusion that his dad was the one responsible and wouldn't accept that there was any other possibility. He stopped going after 2 or 3 sessions. Story 14. I was 18 and had a bit of a breakdown at university and dropped out. I lost my part-time job because of it and was severely depressed. I'd had a pretty awful time the year before and also moved 15 hours away from the town I grew up in. Life was a hectic hell. Her answer? I should move out of home. With what means? Didn't matter, apparently. The problem was I was a mooch on my parents and I needed to get out. Story 15. I'd just like to apologize to everyone commenting. As a therapist, the statements and issues y'all have had with other therapists make me incredibly sad and very angry that these people are practicing. If you ever have a bad experience with a therapist, feel free to report them to the state licensing board. I hope you all have found healing elsewhere. Story 16. The fact that after 2 years, he hadn't given me any comfort or reason to suspect I was getting better. He would just nod, and his questions were so unrelated to what I told him. When I told him about domestic abuse once, he said, "And how do you think that makes you feel?" I replied with, "Pretty low. I feel useless." Then he said, and do you have any siblings?" Seriously, the guy was useless. Story 17. My daughter passed away. I went to a grief therapist who specializes in infant death. During my first visit, she told me I just need to eat chocolate and I would feel better. I kid you not, my husband was in the room with me. At the end of the session, she told my husband, "Make sure you get her some chocolate." We left, I bought a Hershey bar, ate it, did not feel better, never went back to her. Story 18. In the first session, she asked about all the details of what caused my trauma. I cried during the session, went home and cried more. The next week, she told me that I can't be cured, I'll have that trauma and depression forever, and should stop trying to do anything about it. There was no third session. Not with that person. I found another therapist. Story 19. Therapist wanted to talk for hours, like even after I had told her everything possible. She kept probing me to say more, and when I had nothing else to say, she would say, "I can't help you until you tell me everything." What was I supposed to say? She was like, "There's no big enough reason for you to behave like this." What even? Story 20. I have some deep-seated trust issues from something that went down as a kid, so I wasn't exactly going to spill my guts to this woman. So she calls in my mother, demanding she make me talk. When my mother explains to her I don't trust easy, she suggests beating it into me. Never went back. Story 21. She started talking about how Saturn was in retrograde, so I kind of smiled politely. Then she started talking about her horse, and I was like, yeah, let's bring this back around to me. Because screw that, I'm not paying $25 per session to listen to equestrians. Story 22. When he broke doctor-patient confidentiality and told my dad everything that I said in therapy. Never see a shrink who is friends with your parents. Please leave your stories in the comments. I'd love to make a video of them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.